Working in the theatre to install some amplification system, which actually I think was used in Egyptische Helena for the shell, the muscle. And I think Krauss encouraged him to make recordings, and of course they were very primitive on wax, on disc recording. And though the waxes were never, as they weren't made into solid discs, they did tend to get rather worn, I'm afraid. So that's a limitation.
And except on certain sort of gala occasions, he only had one machine, so that you often get short extracts suddenly faded out.
Yes, and of course the best things were played most often, so they are often the poorest sound. But I must say, even with those limitations, the impression I got right through was the terrific intensity of the performance. They're not always polished, they're not always in tune, the notes are sometimes thrown to the wind, but the performance comes across with such intensity. I mean, it makes some of our studio recordings sound very tame by comparison.
And the studio recordings of the time, because for instance we've got Valkyrie Act 1 with Walter. I mean, more intense than that. There's this kind of electricity, yes.
What impresses me is the totality of it. The conductor, the singers, the audience, they are all in it. So you hear spontaneous applause. It's a total theatrical experience.
Well, we hear this in one of the first extracts, which was Jeritza in Salome. Now, Strauss himself, we'll be hearing him conducting later, but he was one of the directors of the theatre, wasn't he, in the 20s?
Yes, he was appointed in 1919, immediately after the war, and it was a joint directorship with Franz Schalk. Well, they rather disliked each other, and it was not very satisfactory, I'm afraid. Strauss, curiously, was rather opposed to the performance of new operas, except his own, of course, and the tension between them was quite intolerable, and in the end, Strauss bowed out at the end of 1924. Schalk carried on alone. Schalk was a very good conductor and musician, obviously, but he was in failing health, and by 1929 he obviously had to withdraw. And they looked around. I think they had hoped to get Furtwängler, but Furtwängler was otherwise engaged. So in the end they took what the local wits called Frankfurtwängler, which was Clemens Krauss. And he, of course, was a real son of Vienna. He was the son of a ballet dancer, and his father, there's some doubt who his father was, but anyway, he was a high court official, let's say no more than that. And Krauss ruled very much like an emperor. He was a dictatorial type, very ambitious, rather ruthless, and he assembled an ensemble around him, and they sang as he wanted, and they sang the operas he wanted. He was very much a dictator. But things didn't always go so well, and he upset the Vienna Philharmonic because his concert programs were so full of new music, the box office takings dropped off. And by 1934, Burghaus, who was chairman of the Vienna Philharmonic, was actually recommending that Krauss should go. And in fact, Krauss did go.
But whilst he was there, obviously the music of Richard Strauss, and particularly with singers like Jeritza, was very much at the forefront.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, Strauss had been instrumental in getting Krauss the job. Strauss was his patron. And so he returned the compliment by performing a great deal of Strauss. Very well, I think. And amongst the star singers that he had at his disposal, of course, was Maria Jeritza, one of the most notorious, famous stars of Vienna and, of course, later at the Metropolitan, a glamorous, sensational actress. And her performances of Salome were legendary, and she was paid a hell of a lot of money, $1,000 a performance. Well, you could hear there the famous swooping scream that everybody loved. And that was in April 1933. Well, in the same year, she also tackled Brünnhilde in Die Walküre. And you hear that same scream again. I don't know what the conductor, Clemens Krauss, thought about it.
Yeritz Brünnhilde in 1933 with Clemens Krauss conducting. Now, the Sieglinde in the Walküre that year was Lotte Lehmann. As I was saying, she recorded in the studio with Bruno Walter. How does that compare with this Krauss performance live in the theatre?
Well, she was always known for the dramatic intensity of her declamation. And one hears that in the Bruno Walter recording. But here, I think her characterization burns through this sound like a laser. I think it gives a very fine impression of her stage performance and Krauss's drive as a conductor.
Lotte Lehmann as Sieglinde with Clemens Krauss conducting. All the extracts we've heard so far are from volume 12 of this series. I should say that it's well advanced, but it's only about halfway through. It's going to be a year or two before it's complete. The number of volume 12 is Koch 314622. Now, you were saying earlier, Bernard, that Krauss left Vienna, having not got on very well with the Vienna Philharmonic. He was persona grata with the Nazis. He went to Berlin. Took a lot of singers with him, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And of course, at this time, Vienna was rather hard up. They were short of money compared with Berlin. Oh. And so they had to look around for young singers that they could find on the way up. And they tended to throw them on, really, with very little rehearsal. I mean, even Jussi Björling made his debut there singing in Swedish while the rest of them sang in German. But he was whisked off then to the Met and never came back. There was a young singer called Esther Reti, a soprano, who later was a great success. Well, she was heard at Budapest. They said, "You're very good. Would you like to sing in Vienna?" "Yes." "What would you like to sing?" "Marguerite." "Okay, we'll put you on in Marguerite." And she had one orchestral rehearsal with Jussi Björling and Kipnis.
Yes.
But one extraordinary young tenor who blazed for a few years was called Todor Mazarov, and he made his debut singing in Bulgarian. And he sang with Bruno Walter. Now, Bruno Walter had taken over from Weingartner, who was a sort of stopgap director. Well, what we hear from Bruno Walter is what a marvellous opera conductor he was. And also what a splendid singer Mazarov was, a great loss. He disappeared for some reason. Here's the end of Carmen with Todor Mazarov singing and Walter conducting.
Theodor Matzeroff, murderously effective in the final scene of Carmen there with Bruno Walter conducting. It's from volume 7 of the series, Koch 314572. One of the things about this set is that we have opera recordings by Walter, virtually none, as far as I know, by Weingartner, and it's the chance to hear these men in the theatre. I mean, Walter, what a wonderful opera conductor.
Absolutely. I think the commitment of these artists comes across, which even in the very best recordings of the time never does, because they tended to regard the gramophone as a bit of a toy and these 4-minute takes and so on. You've never heard anything like the drive and the dramatic continuity that they achieved.
But this particular conductor, because obviously singers the gramophone was good for singers, but not for conductors. So it's, from that point of view, it's very important.
Very important. And I think it demonstrates certain points about tempo.
Yes.
That the tempos in the theatre were often, generally, much faster than we hear on record, despite the need to get things into 4-minute takes, of course, which was supposed to influence tempo.
Now, you were talking about the loss of singers and the loss of money, but after the Anschluss in 1938, obviously the coffers were opened by the Nazis and the Vienna State Opera started thriving again. And in the September of 38, they went to Nuremberg.
Yes, that was a Nazi affair. Under the Nazis, they organised a great deal of guest performances by all their top opera companies who used to travel around the Reich performing. And in Nuremberg, it was September. It was the party days, as they called the Great Rally. And so Hitler ordered that there would be a performance of Die Meistersing on Nuremberg. And the Vienna Opera was brought along. They assembled extra choruses. The theatre had been redesigned and refurbished. And they brought the stars of the time, Bockelmann, Lemnitz, and a very good American American-born tenor, Ivan Laholm. And, of course, the conductor was the star of the time, which was Furtwängler. And it's an outstanding performance. Rudolf Bockelmann as Sachs, beautifully sung, so tender, musically and vocally, absolutely under his command. And, of course, Tiana Lemnitz, a famous air of the time. And Furtwängler giving that wonderful lilting rhythm over which they could converse in a natural manner. I think this is most impressive.
Bockelmann and Tinia Lemnitz with Furtwängler, as you say, giving a marvellous lift to the rhythm. So it does become a composition piece. It's live in Nuremberg in September 1938. The Chancellor in the Royal Box, presumably.
Yes.
A whole CD, this is volume 2 of the Koch set, and it's the whole CD is given over to this amazing performance of Meistersinger. Just looking what else is on it. It's Parsifal with Knappertsbusch, a pre-war recording, but that's more familiar, but always good to hear, Knappertsbusch. So this, I think, is a very recommendable volume. The number's 314522. Now, Furtwängler also turns up conducting a live Tristan, which includes the whole of Act 3 and substantial extracts from the first 2 acts. We do, of course, have a studio, and a very successful studio Tristan from Furtwängler.
Yes. I will just say that in certain passages there is that extra element of dramatic drive that comes on, particularly in the first 2 acts, I think, which were perhaps the more studied, if you like, of that recording. The sound is for the time and for these recordings, not bad, and obviously he used 2 machines, so there was the continuity. Sadly, I don't think, apart from Margareta Klose, the singing is not distinguished. Max Lorenz and Hilde Konecny, they swoop around, a bit like seagulls in the wind. They put the drama across, but I mean, in the great love duet, the notes are thrown to the wind. One hardly knows what it is.
Konecny, of course, we don't hear much on record. She didn't mean commercial recording, so I suppose from that point of view, it's quite an interesting document.
Yes, and it's a document of a style of performance that, who knows, perhaps Wagner expected. Yes. Did he want that kind of pedantic articulation of every note in these swoops and screams in the love duet?
Well, we know what the composer wanted in a 1942 Salome because Strauss was conducting it.
Yes, now, now, if I pick that up, now Strauss said, I'm not too bothered about whether it's accurate or not. What I want is a performance and commitment.
Yeah. Do you find this here? I mean, he made that famous remark about Salome, it should be conducted like fairy music.
Yes. Now, that's very clear here, I think, because compared with some famous recordings of recent times, I pick out Karajan's in particular, the voices here are very forward, very clear, and although you hear the orchestra, it is very light and subordinated to the impetus of the voices, and Strauss conducts with great forward movement. Now, I've picked out a passage with Hans Hotter. Now, here he is singing Jochanan, and you may remember that Salome says that he's schrecklich. My God, when you listen to Hotter, you know what she means.
In keinem Fallen, der den Schild vom Pfeil zieht und die Leiber wie Riesen. Sie heißt die Aussieht vom Bett ihrer Scheiden, vom Bett ihrer Brust.
Hans Hotter in a 1942 Salome in Vienna, conducted by Strauss himself. That's part of Volume 3. The number's 314532. Now, there are some other performances of Salome in the set, aren't there?
Yes, with a change of cast. And most interesting is Paul Schöffler, who also sang Jochanan. Very different, of course, from Hotter. Beautiful singing, a noble performance, as opposed to this rather dominating performance from Hotter. Very interesting to hear the variety. Others were, there was Der Motor as narrator, and Josef Witt, who was a famous producer many years later. And Elsa Schultz sang Salome, a bit wobbly, I thought. Now, also on this disc, which I rapidly draw a veil over it, is Strauss's version of Idomeneo, of all things, even including an intermezzo that he's composed specially.
It's interesting to hear it there. I mean, I've always wanted to know what is Idomeneo like, and here it is.
Yes.
I mean, nobody's going to record it, are they?
No, they certainly aren't, no. Still, I think, too, it's a mistake to think that Idomeneo was neglected, because I saw, looking through various notes about the opera, that it had been performed not many years before, so it wasn't a neglected opera.
No. Now, quite a lot of the boxes which we haven't talked about, we have the Italian repertory, sung in German, which was something that went on in Vienna until Karajan turned up in the late 50s, and even he had terrible trouble getting rid of German language performance of Italian operas. How did these strike you, Krauss and Böhm and people conducting Italian opera?
Well, I was very disappointed in Böhm. There's a recording of his performance of Don Carlo, which is full of the worst aspects of German conducting of Italian opera. Slow, lots of rubato, lots of pauses in the orchestra as well as in the singers. Frieda Leider once remarked when she went to Italy to sing, she was amazed how strict the Italians were compared with the Germans, and how well rehearsed and accurately they sang. So, but I think the occasional Italian stagione was interesting. Toti Dal Monte singing wonderfully as Rosina, but an awful baritone, murdering Figaro in a horrible manner. But I think Krauss was very good at the ensemble works, and actually there was a performance of Falstaff in November 41, I think, which brings out his qualities.
Everybody's sounding very jolly after that. It's a pity that Krauss died of disappointment in Mexico City in 1956, because what a wonderful Falstaff he could have recorded with Italian singers at a later period.
Absolutely. It was a work designed for his remarkable technical skill.
So, summing up, who are these sets for?
Well, singer buffs will certainly want Jeritza in Volume 12, and Strauss enthusiasts will jump at the unique chance to hear him conduct excerpts from two performances of Salome in Volume 3. Furtwänglerites will certainly want the master singers in Volume 2, if they can forget that you know who was singing in the equivalent of the Royal Box, and the almost complete Tristan in Volume 11. Otherwise, I think the level of noise and the rather scrappy excerpts will disappoint everyone except the most determined fan for this kind of thing.
Now, Volume 1 may be a good thing to start with. It's got some wonderful shorter extracts, including one we're going to hear now, which is the young Kirsten Flagstad, one of the singers who I gather presumably was brought in when Krauss went to Berlin. As a relatively unknown, was she then?
Yes, she was. Yes, she was at the beginning of her career.
This is part of the final scene of Götterdämmerung, conducted by Weingartner.
Very interesting. He was the stopgap director. Now, Weingartner was the notorious enemy of the Bayreuth slow, ponderous style, and there is, as far as I know, nothing on record of him conducting vocal excerpts from opera, so this is most important to hear his quality. And then also we have, after that, Richard Tauber singing part of Giuditta with Leha conducting a wonderful night.
Thank you.
frustratingly sudden fade in the final scene of Wagner's Götterdämmerung, live from the Vienna State Opera on the evening of the 11th of September 1936, with Kirsten Flagstad at the very peak of her powers, Weingartner conducting wonderfully. Finally, from the same volume, Volume 1, Richard Tauber in one of the hit numbers from Franz Lehár's opera Judita. Unlike the Novotná track I played earlier this morning, this isn't from the first night. The recording we're going to hear was made a year later, on St. Valentine's Day 1935, though once again, the conductor is the composer himself.
Du bist meine Sonne, du bist ein Traum, von süßer Wonne, kann ich nicht bei dir sein, dann ist mir die Welt so leer. Blühen Blumen, die blühen für mich nicht so fern. Du bist meine Seele, du bist die Frau, die ich empfehle. Ich schenk dir mein Leben, ich will dich lieben. Du bist mein Schicksal, ich liebe nur dich allein. Wenn süße Stunden zärtlich mir winken, wenn mir dein Blick Wonnen verheißt, dann komm ich zu dir. Lieben zu fließen, will ich dir sinken. Wenn du wieder traust, du mich umhängst, dann mag ich zu dir. Herrliche Frau,
Richard Tauber singing Du bist meine Sonne live at the Vienna State Opera in February 1935, with Franz Lehár himself conducting. Like the Flagstad item, this comes from Volume 1 of Koch's series Vienna State Opera Live, 2 CDs with the set number 314512. Record Review is produced by Clive Portbury and Patrick Lambert and presented by me, Richard Osborne.